So you should be seeing the HELIX screen right now. You should be seeing the okay, good. HELIX app is clear. That makes me happy. We got the chat on the side, so you'll see what people are saying, which works out really well. I'm going to record this and rebroadcast it. So, you know, even if it's just a couple of us, I mean, it's midday on a Friday. So thanks for coming if you're here. I want to talk about the Dr. Z amp. This is kind of a finished patch right here, and we're going to start building it from scratch. I'm an amp and pedals guy. I still love using amps and pedals. And the HELIX to me is just like the perfect tool for when I'm in a situation where I can't play loudly or recording, because quite honestly, I don't have the studio, the space, and the quality microphones required to actually make a decent recording of physical amps. I like the way that amps sound a lot better. My playing's like okay at best, so I'm probably like most of us out there as well. Show of hands or in the comments would really help me. How many folks here are actually using the Dr. Z amp? It's not a incredibly popular model. So anybody here actually using the Dr. Z for anything? Okay. I'll just keep rolling by and just throw anything in chat if you have any questions. I should be able to see you here. Clean sound Variax. Okay. I like the breakup of the Dr. Z. It happens to be one of these amps that I don't think has a ton of the fizz or fuzz going on. So I'm going to actually create a patch and use a humbucker and a single coil guitar and show some of the things that I actually do to deal with that. So we're going to kind of go through some strategies on a number of things, but using this Dr. Z. Let's take a quick tour first of the amplifier. So here's the amp model. First and foremost, the actual Dr. Z has 3 knobs. And you can see that there's a ton of parameters that you can actually change. And one of the things to kind of keep in mind is that an amplifier like this that just has a volume, it's a non-master volume, which means you don't have separate gain controls and volume controls for the power amplifier. For that type of amplifier, you want to have the master parameter all the way up at 10. And that basically makes the amp behave more like it does in real life, where there is no volume control for the power section. Also, there's only a treble and bass control on this amp. The mids, there's no such thing. So this is an invented control that the folks at line 6 created, the mids. At 4.3, they're very basic. So at 4.3 on this particular model, that's just kind of the way that the amp normally sounds. So if you don't screw with the mids control, you don't screw with the presence, the amplifier will behave in essence the way that the real one does. So a couple things on the setup of the amp. 3.6 doesn't sound like a lot of drive. You know, there's always this tendency to just want to crank it. And if you crank this amp, it spits and farts out quite a bit. I mean, it's a sound, but again, for the models that I want to create, I want there to be some place to go as you're developing the sound going into the amp. I want to be able to switch on effect and build gain so I have multiple sounds rather than starting someplace super high gain and really the pedals do nothing but add tiny, tiny bits of flavor. So I have the drive here set at 3.6. Here's a I guess a secret tip is that typically, you know, amplifiers like this might hit their maximum power, so the maximum wattage as low as 2 or 3, sometimes 4 on a 1 to 10 scale on the volume control. Once you get past that, you're really just adding saturation. You're not really increasing the power, and particularly not increasing the volume that you're getting out of the amplifier. So the tendency to say, okay, I want a full power sound, this has to be near 8, 9, or 10, is really a tendency you want to drive away from. I mean, here at 3, this is a very dry sound. You're getting plenty of crunch just from the amplifier. That means anything coming from before it is just going to drive it over the top a little bit more. So with this, I have my drive at 3.6 and the bass and treble controls. Pretty simple. You can see brackets next to these numbers. Those brackets, of course, mean that I have controller assignments to certain of these parameters. So let's go to the controller assignments here, and you'll see that drive, which is the basic volume of that amp model, I have a foot switch 5 assigned to that drive with a minimum value of 3.6 and a maximum value of 6. So that means when that foot switch is on, the drive is going to change. So we go back to the amp model. I'm going to actually hit that foot switch that I have labeled as amp drive, and you see a number of controls changing. The most important things is that the drive goes up to 6 and the bass goes down a little bit. Again, the more gain that you have, the more sometimes you have to roll back the bass because it'll suck away a lot of power. You want the power going to the creation of a nice tone versus kind of the very, very low sounds. So again, as I'm hitting this amp drive button, I'm getting 2 different sounds. I'm on the bridge pickup here of a dual humbucker guitar. It's a PRS, and this is the higher gain sound. And turning that down, here's the lower gain sound. When you really dig in, the difference is subtle. And here it is, lower gain. It means you don't have separate gain controls and volume controls for the power amplifier. For that type of amplifier, you want to have the master parameter all the way up at 10. And that basically makes the amp behave more like it does in real life, where there is no volume control for the power section. Also, there's only a treble and bass control on this amp. The mids, there's no such thing. So this is an invented control that the folks at line 6 created, the mids. At 4.3, they're very basic. So at 4.3 on this particular model, that's just kind of the way that the amp normally sounds. So if you don't screw with the mids control, you don't screw with the presence, the amplifier will behave in essence the way that the real one does. So a couple things on the setup of the amp. 3.6 doesn't sound like a lot of drive. You know, there's always this tendency to just want to crank it. And if you crank this amp, it spits and farts out quite a bit. I mean, it's a sound, but again, for the models that I want to create, I want there to be some place to go as you're developing the sound going into the amp. I want to be able to switch on effect and build gain so I have multiple sounds rather than starting someplace super high gain and really the pedals do nothing but add tiny, tiny bits of flavor. So I have the drive here set at 3.6. Here's a I guess a secret tip is that typically, you know, amplifiers like this might hit their maximum power. So the maximum wattage as low as 2 or 3, sometimes 4 on a 1 to 10 scale on the volume control. Once you get past that, you're really just adding saturation. You're not really increasing the power, and particularly not increasing the volume that you're getting out of the amplifier. So the tendency to say, okay, I want a full power sound, this has to be near 8, 9, or 10, is really a tendency you want to drive away from. I mean, here at 3, This is a very dry sound. You're getting plenty of crunch just from the amplifier. That means anything coming from before it is just going to drive it over the top a little bit more. So with this, I have my drive at 3.6 and the bass and treble controls. Pretty simple. You can see brackets next to these numbers. Those brackets, of course, mean that I have controller assignments to certain of these parameters. So let's go to the controller assignments here, and you'll see that drive, which is the basic volume of that amp model, I have a foot switch 5 assigned to that drive with a minimum value of 3.6 and a maximum value of 6. So that means when that foot switch is on, the drive is going to change. So we go back to the amp model. I'm going to actually hit that foot switch that I have labeled as amp drive. And you see a number of controls changing. The most important things is that the drive goes up to 6 and the bass goes down a little bit. Again, the more gain that you have, the more sometimes you have to roll back the bass because it'll suck away a lot of power. You want the power going to the creation of a nice tone versus kind of the very, very low sounds. So again, as I'm hitting this amp drive button, I'm getting two different sounds. I'm on the bridge pickup here of a dual humbucker guitar. It's a PRS, and this is the higher gain sound. I'm turning that down. Here's the lower gain sound. When you really dig in, the difference is subtle. And here it is, lower gain. The good thing about that lower gain sound is I can use the volume control to kind of subtly go with a much cleaner tone. Impedance. And for more vintage wound, tight pickups, single coils, I have a kind of a vintage reissue 59 Strat. I keep that all the way down here in the 70, 90, sometimes all the way down to 32K. That's one of the first and important things you can do to use the same patch for different instruments. You'll notice as I roll the volume down on just this guitar, so there's no drive, particularly when I have the amp on the lower drive setting. And as I bring it up, it starts to drive. So if I plug in a different guitar that has a different output and I start playing, the patch is going to react very, very differently. And if I want to be on that edge of breakup, and I play with similar dynamics on my Strat, you're not going to get that sound, that crunchy sound. So the concept that you can buy a patch or have a patch and it'll just work and sound the same for every guitar usually means the patch is very highly processed or that it's probably better for one sound or another. Here, let me unplug real quick and actually go to the Strat. I have no idea if it's in tune or not, so we'll find that out pretty quick. Here's the Strat with the volume all the way up. It's really not enough to get the thing driving. But in my snapshots, if I go to the Strat 59 sound, it gets it driving. I like that. Back to the humbucker guitar. If I keep it on the Strat setting of this patch and I plug the humbucker guitar in, now I'm at a much higher drive. and I really want it to be edge of breakup, not way after breakup. So I go back to the Les Paul Snapshot. And it's much more edge of breakup. So how did I do this? Well, there's a couple settings that change when I go between the Les Paul and Strat 59. The most important that you'll see is this EQ and dynamics blocks. So when I go to the Les Paul, the EQ goes on and the dynamics goes off. When I go to the Strat, the EQ goes off, the dynamics turns on. And you also see that the impedance, or the guitar input impedance, changes. So going from the Les Paul to the Strat, I'm going from 230K down to 90K. That really is important for the kind of top end brightness that's coming out of the instrument. Let's take a look though at this EQ and dynamics patch. The EQ, as you see, has kind of a boost in the 2200 and 6600 hertz ranges, and a little bit of a cut down by 240 and 80. More specifically for the Les Paul, that just is a dark instrument, and I find that I use an EQ to kind of boost the top end to keep kind of some of that sparkle that I'm getting with the Strat. So again, when I have the Strat on, this EQ's off. When I throw a humbucker guitar on, this EQ comes on. The second one is a studio compressor. Now these compressors, the LA studio comp is really generally used towards the end or after the amplifier. But I'm just using that particularly with the Strat to do two things. One is to goose the signal. So you see that there is some gain here. And it's really not a super aggressive compressor, but with a little bit of gain and peak reduction, it kind of rounds out some of the harshness. Because if you just take a Strat signal and gain it up, you're going to be boosting a lot of that attack. Because again, the spank that you get from a Strat is wonderful, but if those spikes are a little bit too high, a little too picky at the beginning of the notes, it can create a harshness. And creating a patch that kind of is smooth for a Strat, but not lifeless for a humbucker, or on the other side, like really nice and lively for a humbucker, but like totally, smooth for a Strat, you have to do something. And the way that I'll do that is creating this EQ and a compressor in the beginning to kind of condition the signal coming in from the guitar. So I can kind of use this patch all night long with two guitars and just kind of switch snapshots depending on which guitar that I'm using. The other thing that you can do is actually just create two different patches, one for each guitar. I mean, however you want to do it, of course, is fine. So moving on, this is kind of the input conditioning. We've got a couple of stomp boxes, and then this kind of is an A-B routed entirely to B. So none of the dry signals going straight to the amp, and this is going through a U-vibe and a bias trem into the amp, IR, down to the next path. There's my room verb. And I also have an A-B split here where I kind of have a, it's not wet dry, it's kind of like wet A, wet B, where I have a reverb going on to path A and a delay going into path B. And it's really nice because you don't have the effect of the reverb going into the delay or the delay going into the reverb. So I can turn these on separately or together and not have them kind of interfere with each other. This is a bucket brevade. It's very subtle. And the reverb is a spring reverb. We'll hear it without the... And you can actually hear the drip, which is kind of nice. When they're together, they don't interfere with each other. So you hear the repeats from the bucket brigade as they kind of degrade, and they're not muddied up by the reverb, which is kind of cool. And the reverb, you kind of get a nice clean sound without getting repeats of the wet sound. So I think putting these together is a really cool. It's a nice wet sound without being overwhelming, and it's just enough to be heard in a live mix. What I find is your reverbs really start to matter less and less and less when you start playing with a lot of other instruments. How are these reverbs and delays set? Well, I've got a middle of the road decay on the spring reverb. I keep the low and high cuts where they are. I mean, I can be a little more generous if I wanted, and the mix is pretty high, all the way up at 41%. But remember, this is only half the signal. So, you know, even if I had this up at 100%, so let's actually turn the delay off. If I have the spring reverb at 100%, you're still getting half the signal running through this path B and coming through the output. So you still get dry signal. Just that this particular one is 100% wet. So if I go down to 50%, we're really talking about a quarter of the whole signal being the reverb. I like a little bit of dry to kind of flow through both paths. And same thing with the decay. My mix is down here by 40%. Because if I had the mix all the way up to 100, you get a lot more of those kind of nasty digital repeats, which I love so much. Okay, so we have both these down at 40. I think we can be happy. I don't have these tempo synced again because it's just to give a little bit of a cushion for the note to sit on. All right, let's head over. I'll keep the spring reverb on, take the bucket brigade off. All right, let's just listen to the modulation effects. The first one is this univibe. It's obviously nice and slow. And you know, the univibe can be a very nice subtle effect, something just to, you know, to let the sound kind of flow a little bit more interesting. To do that, what I'll do is reduce the lamp bias a little bit, 3.6. I have the mix real low down here by 27. Intensity, I usually don't ever have the intensity above 5 unless I'm doing like a wet dry type thing. And interesting here, I have it on note sync. So I'm going to, you know, do a tap tempo here, 93, give or take. If I tap a faster tempo. And I really like syncing a univibe to a dotted quarter note or a dotted eighth note. Let me go a little bit slower here on the tempo. The brackets around the note sync is a telltale sign that there's something else going on, and there absolutely is. I have a controller assignment. If you look here for the note sync with a maximum and a minimum value of the full range, and that's associated with expression pedal number 2. So actually, as I change the expression pedal, it's changing the speed of the modulation effect. But here's the cool thing about it. Because I have note sync on, It's changing the speed, but it's always changing to a speed that's aligned with the tempo of the song. So I can go from eighth notes to half note triplets, quarter notes, quarter notes. So no matter kind of what feel you want, that's going to be in line with the tempo. And again, it's a nice wash. Let's turn that one off and go to the trem. Tempo sync for the bias trem is off. So this is a similar effect. Oh, I'm sorry, Dennis, are you able to hear me a little bit better now, or are you just hearing all the banging going on downstairs? They're like literally right behind me, building a basement, I guess. Is this a little better, Dennis? There might be a little bit of a delay. So Dennis, I'm going to step a little bit back from the microphone and play a little bit softer. Tell me if that improves the situation for you, okay? Moving on, what I'm going to do here is just use the same expression pedal, which gives you a smooth gradient for the speed of the trem. I'm never going to have a univibe and a 60s bias trem. Ah, son of a gun. All right, thanks for the heads up on that one, Dennis. What I'll do is I'll just go I'll go another 10 minutes and kind of see what the YouTube technology is giving me after that. And I'll also give out my email address. If there's anything here that you thought you heard that you might want to do more, really send me an email. I'm happy to help. If you need super support, the Evertech link from Chad, who provides amazing one-on-one, is also in the event description here, and you can go there, and it's really nice getting support from him. He's a real knowledgeable guy from the Facebook support group. So let me see here, one more thing that might help a little bit. Turn that loop back down. This is my I don't know what you would call it, interface software. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to turn that trem off. Kind of the last main topic, and I'll go through it quickly because there might be some software issues, which makes me sad, and I hope it makes you sad too, is these 4 pedals here. And it's really 4 different pedals that are crunch pedals. The interesting thing about doing this is that it gives you a lot of different combinations. It gives you different combinations to kind of tailor the final sound. Again, this is not a particularly high gain sound, but it is a sound that is starting to crunch. And so the first thing that I want to show is actually a simple EQ. I'm using this kind of like a treble booster. It's not 100% accurate to call it that, but I have over a 6 decibel boost dialed into a simple EQ. So there's a 6 decibel boost, 1.8 decibel boost on the highs, and just a little bit on the mid gains and a little bit low down on the low gains. I have a mid frequency of 785. That's honestly just about where most tube screamers are tuned to. So I'm going to just raise this up to about 1K. And I'll save this patch. So when I turn it on, you can definitely hear in the increase in the trebles. You can hear in the reverb more than anything. And with it off, you're not getting a big volume change. So with the EQ, even though you're increasing the level by 6 decibels, you're just cramming that into an amp that's already on the edge of breakup. So the sound change that you're getting is a little bit of a boost in terms of volume, but you're just pushing the amp more, and you're driving the top end of the frequency spectrum. So just an EQ pedal alone into an amp that's just starting to overdrive can serve as one of your drive pedals, which is fantastic from a DSP standpoint, because I'm out of DSP on this row. And there's a number of things I want to do more on the bottom row. So using this EQ as a drive is really nice. It's a nice to be used after other pedals. The first one in the train is a Minotaur or the Klon, set to a very low gain. Here it is, the sound. Here it is, off. On. So again, it's more of a boost than anything else. I'm going to take the decay down and the mix down a little bit on the reverb. I'm clear now. Go figure, right? There's definitely a delay. So if I'm getting to your comments late, sorry about that. I'm actually going to turn all the verb off. I love to edit dry because all the wet effects totally obscure what your core tone is. And if your core tone is muddy, and then you have wet effects on top of it, it's just a total mud factory, which is no good. And the beautiful thing about putting this Klon first and just having a little bit of a level boost and a little bit of gain, 2.5, 1.8, around that area, is still, if I roll back, so here I am on my neck pickup, if I roll back on the volume, here I just rolled it back. What I can do is dial in a lot of different gain sounds. That's a very kind of clear, it's got a little, it might be harder to hear the guitar, but there's definitely a lot of clean signal coming through that. Then bring the gain back up on the guitar. What I find with the Helix is that, we all talk about how, oh wow, the tone really changes when you use the volume knob, but then we build these patches with like a distortion pedal with the gain up to 10, and then it's like, hey, why isn't it cleaning up when I use my volume pedal? So creating an amp that's just on the verge of breakup with a distortion pedal, that's not an overdrive pedal, that's just a little bit of extra, allows you to kind of dial in a lot of different gain sounds. Still with the volume pedal, and I have one of the gain pedals on. I can add the EQ on top of that, and that's going to be my brightest sound. I can roll back the tone. Already a lot of choices here. Just the Minotaur with an EQ. And that's on the neck pickup of a humbucker guitar. Amazing, right? Let's turn these off and just take a quick look at what else is there. I have a red squeeze, which is a compressor. Now, there's always like, where does the compressor go, before or after the dirt? And I say both. So I have the opportunity to put the compressor after the Minotaur or before what is a tube screamer. And they both work pretty well. Here it is, kind of a leady sound. And we'll do the same thing with the red squeeze on. And it'll just go forever. And it rounds everything out. Nice little sound. Doesn't add a lot of gain. Or I could do the same thing. Here's my tube screamer. And I could just throw the compressor on before that. And that, I mean, Dynacomp into tube screamers, classic. Big middly sound. This is where you get your violin kind of sound. And I can always go crazy and add the Minotaur on top of it. And it's not too much because nothing here has a ton of gain. Take the compressor off. Now we just have a clon into a tube scream. Nice, big, nasty sound, which is amazing. So to recap, bang, bang, bang. So I'm sorry about this, Jesus. To recap, we've got three kind of dirt options. One of them is a boost sitting at the end. One of them is a tube screamer set the way that tube screamers are set all the time. Another one is a clon up front with a Dynacomp in between them. And it gives you a million different options where you can do clon into a boost, clon into a compressor, clon into a tube screamer, compressor into a tube screamer and a boost. And then, because I have that amp drive button, right, I can choose a higher gain amp sound that's already driving and just throw the EQ on top of it and drive the hell out of it, sorry, for a real grindy sound. Or just the compressor into it. And again, throwing everything into the overdriven amp is going to be way too much, and it's just going to sound like terrible. So here's everything. Too much, too much. But just the clon definitely sounds okay. Even the clon just into a compressor to the super overdriven amp. So there's our patch. I'm pretty happy with it. Let's take the amp back to the lower drive setting. I'm going to do clon into a tube screamer, and I think I've got a you should be able to hear this. We'll see. This is just like a B minor thing. I mean, it fits. It works. It's a great sound. It's kind of martially. I mean, honestly, it's not a Marshall sound, but it gives you a range of tones all the way from really nice, cleanish sounds clean sounds with maybe a little bit of grind to kind of a drier, higher gain, leady thing. Or thicker, heavier, husky voiced, smoker voice. Um, smoker voice. Huh? Enough said about this. We'll recap everything that we went through. And if you're still with me, bless you. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry for the sound problems. I'll get here. I promise. I promise we'll get here. What did we learn? One, getting a great amp model and dealing with the fact that this is an amp that only has 3 knobs and there's a million parameters. How do we set it to sound somewhat like the original mic? 2, understanding that you're getting plenty of drive and plenty of push even at very low settings of the amplifiers. Everything at 10 usually sounds terrible. 3, using the controller assignments within the amplifier to give you 2 completely different amp sounds without having to use your snapshot functions. So putting a controller assignment to a pedal to actually change the voice of the amplifier without changing the output volume all too much. Next, using snapshots to actually allow for settings for different guitars. In this case, you know, the Paul Reed Smith will sound good pretty much anywhere, but particularly Les Paul and Strat, having an EQ for the Les Paul to kind of boost a little bit of the top end and attenuate a little bit of the bottom end versus a compressor for the Strat style guitar, just to manage the attack a little bit and round out that attack without killing the life of it. And of course, changing the input Z, which is now per patch, not per global. In terms of an impulse response, picking one that sounds good to you, or a cab, but running that into a room reverb with a low decay just to give you a little bit of ambiance, so you can have a romantic evening strumming away. In terms of the wet effects, taking your reverb and delay, putting them on different paths, particularly reverbs that are nice and clean sounding, and delays that kind of give you a degradation of the repeats. And then from a dirt standpoint, stacking and cascading the gain so you have a lot of tonal options. So that includes a clon. I like to start with a clon. You can do it a lot of different ways, with a low gain and modest level. Throwing a MXR Dynacomp kind of in between two of the overdrive pedals gives you a lot of options. Your traditional tube screamer, which I prefer after a Dynacomp, and using an EQ patch as an actual boost to drive that amp over into more and more compression. So that is the Dr. Z. It's a patch that I call Dr. Zhivago, and I'll be putting that on Custom Tones soon. If you want to see expertly built patches that have been really, really well thought out, there's a lot of folks that do that out there. Glenn, I'm gonna miss somebody. I know Chad does them. So again, if you think about all the things that are considered when making a patch and making a patch flexible, that's the kind of thing that does that. I might be lagging a little bit here, so I'm kind of waiting for the actual stream to catch up. But I'm at a point where I'll take questions. I'll hang just for another minute or two. If I have any questions, you can type them here. I'll actually chat here. Okay. Wow, it's really laggy. That's something else. I honestly don't know if it's anybody even here. Oh yeah. Oh. Bless you guys. Thanks for hanging out. The live broadcast and what I'm actually saying is lagged quite a bit. So I am just going to hang for a second, see if there's any questions through the UPIT tube interface for text. And if there's not, then hey, I hope you learned something today, and I'll try my best to have an archive of this go up online. King of Tone. That's what's it. Oh, this is fantastic. The crown follows me. Oh my God. Could this be any better? Seriously. All right, I'm going to stop the broadcast right now. I really appreciate you if you stuck with it, and apologies again for any audio issues. I'm going to work on the technology part and ensure that the next time we have a wonderful unencumbered time, and we'll probably be talking about dual amp blenders next time. Holy Moses, what even is that? Dual amp blenders. All right, until then, Take care of each other. Happy playing. Sweet guitaring. Take care.